Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Bits of Bias. We are actually in the Imagine Film Festival today, and this is the scientific program, Things to Come. Today, this afternoon, we are going to talk together about artificial intelligence and also about the darker side of AI. And I invite all of you to participate, and you can participate by asking questions later on in the Q&A box. You can see it down in your screen next to the chat. And if you ask a Q&A, if you ask a question, I will let our speakers answer it, because we have two people who are going to tell us a bit more today. They are Marleen Sticker and Stefania Milan. Marleen, she is a director of WAAG, and that's a society that actually operates on the intersection between science and technology and art. And she also is a professor of practice at the Hogeschool van Amsterdam. Recently, in 2019, she wrote a book, The Internet is Broken and we cannot fix it. Maybe she will tell a little bit about that later on. And Stefania, she is an associate professor at the University of Amsterdam, and she focuses on the interaction between digital technology and activism. And basically, well, of course, you all know about artificial intelligence, because it's simply all around us in facial recognition software, in voice recognition software, but also, for example, in the Corona Melder, the app on your smartphone that can detect people with COVID around you. And I don't know how many of you have read the classic novel of George Orwell, 1984. But in that book already, you could feel that there could also be potentially a darker side of AI. And actually, that's also the case in the documentary Coded Bias. And I'm not sure if everyone has seen this movie, but you can also visit it for free by clicking on the link in this program, or watching it on Netflix. And in this documentary, there's one of the lead scientists. Her name is Joy Buolamwini, and she started the Algorithmic Justice League. What that is exactly and why she thinks it's necessary, you can see in the documentary, and we also will discuss it a bit later on. For now, for anyone who came in a bit later, I want to repeat again that please, if you have any questions to our speakers, Marleen and Stefania, let me know via the Q&A box, and we will try to answer them all. And for now, I wish you a nice program, and I would like to give the stage, or at least the digital stage, to Marleen. Thank you.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much. Yeah, I had a pleasure to look at the documentary a few months ago, and also had a talk with the director. And I'm really well, happy and also amazed that it's now a Netflix production. So it's I think it's global. Everybody can see it now when as long as you have a Netflix access, of course. But it's really remarkable that a movie which, well, normally would be being seen as something that is very marginal in the sense of being critical about tech, is not always something that you would sort of expect to be launched on a global scale on a platform like Netflix. But something they did on this documentary was really well. They really made it very accessible. They made a storyline that immediately engages and makes it understandable how technology, AI, data can be discriminating people, is an extension of power, and that something is at stake, something really deeply problematic is at stake. Not in the least because they have a beautiful cast. Joy, of course, which you already mentioned, but also Katie O'Neill, Meredith Broussard, Silky Carlo, Virginia Eubanks, Ravi Naik, and I think everybody was also very like happily. So it's sort of, wow, what a lot of good women are talking about this. And what I understand from the director is that she was just moving into this topic, and then she was not deliberately going for women, but a lot of the like fundamental critique on AI and comes from some very remarkable scholars. Writing also really good books about it. So when I wrote my book, The Internet is Broken, but we can fix it. I think you just said that we can't fix it, but well, maybe I'm too optimistic, but then I'm professionally optimistic. Otherwise, we will sit in a little corner cry about what happened to the digital and to the internet and to technology. So yes, I think we can fix it. We can start to be part of a movement that thinks about technology in a different way than it's being presented to us. But by writing the book, these women that are now in this documentary definitely have influenced me, and I think their books are remarkable. I think that what's underlying problem with artificial intelligence, it's a huge mystification, and it's part of a almost religious movement thinking about an ideology which tells us that we humans are failures and that we need technology to overcome our failures. So that as long as it's artificial intelligence, data, and algorithms, that they will help us to become transhuman, and that we have, and a lot of the storylines that brings us this idea that artificial intelligence will solve our problems are based on this concept that we have to overcome our own, that humans are not good enough. And I think it's also interesting that that the term intelligence is being taken away as appropriated for this whole field. And I think over the last decades, again and again, people started to critique it. Maybe, and I think it is Broussard who said, of Katie O'Neill, said artificial intelligence is statistics on steroids. So it's statistics, it's data. You can't call it intelligence. I think there something goes really wrong already. And I think maybe also as a sort of like a contra movement, we now talk about more and more about social intelligence, ecological intelligence, and maybe also about the brain-gut connection. So a lot of our intelligence comes from the gut, from microorganisms. So what we define as intelligence is up in the air at the moment. I believe we have a very interesting discussion about that. What is mind? What is intelligence? What is consciousness? And so I wish we could have a more in-depth discussion about the term intelligence. But at the moment, we have to stick with what people are telling us, what this AI is going to bring to us. And I think in the Netherlands, only today, officially, it was mentioned that I think around 280 million euros will be spent on a national AI program. And of course, again, this is all about that we have problems in healthcare, we have problems in all areas of society, and AI will help us to solve these problems. And then, interesting enough, in this case, in this program, there will be then ethical legal aspects lab, ethical legal social aspects lab, ELSA labs. So a site, so we're going to solve it with AI, we're going to spend a lot of money, put it in AI, put it in patents, put it in intellectual property rights, put it in systems in place. But then, of course, we will have some, well, debate about the legal issues, ethical discussion. And I think what the documentary shows is that the discussion is not that you can have an ethical discussion at the site. It's actually the ethics is in who owns the technology, where are we optimizing for, who decides upon success. And this is what we see during the documentary, that when you want to control people, it's very nice to have this kind of technologies. So technologies are not neutral. Maybe what I'm of course using a lot in my presentations is the quote from, let's see where she is, from Donna Haraway, which says, technology is not neutral. We're inside of what we make, and it's inside of us. We are living in a world of connections, and it matters which ones get made and unmade. And I think this is where it all starts. It matters which one get made and unmade. So who defines why are we going to use AI for what kind of questions? Who's financing it? Who is defining where we are optimizing for? At the moment, most of the problems that has been presented to us are where the issues where AI is there part of a surveillance control system as an extension of power structures. So one of the problems with AI, of course, is that society doesn't have the ability at the moment to finance AI. So we don't have contra AI. We don't have the labor unions don't have their AI to put against the AI of the CEOs. So there is not a real, well, let's say market, but there's not a real well-positioned, a good organized position for society to act with AI. So at the moment, we're just reacting on AI that's being implied on us. And I think documentaries like this, definitely the way that it can sort of engage people, making it very understandable. Of course, the story starts with that facial recognition technology that the Joy wants to use for gaming. Actually, she wants to use it for a nice gaming thing. Doesn't work with her because she has a black face. So it doesn't work. It only works on white faces. Well, this is a very clear way to make it very understandable for people that technology can be biased or is intrinsically biased by default. So yes, if we think about technology as artifacts for imposing power, then of course you want to democratize technology. This is the other movement where people try to engage people, to get people in a position that they have their technologies to overcome the disbalance. Unfortunately, we are at the moment in a situation where big tech controls almost all technologies, that politics and society as such is not so aware of it. It's getting more aware, but it's still lacking. It's really behind. It's not in the front of the discussion. So I hope this documentary can contribute to a more informed society, that it can also help to activate people, scholars, people in places where they can decide upon the type of, like the financing of it, and that it will help us to set up a bigger, stronger position about public tech, open tech, fair tech, because something that we don't touch upon at the moment is also the ecological footprint of AI and data storage. So yes, I'm very happy with this documentary, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion, and I hope it can contribute to the next. If I say we can fix it, we definitely have to fix the mystification around AI, but also the ownership and the structures around AI. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Marleen. And well, we will talk about this later on in our panel discussion together with Stefania. Meanwhile, the first questions are popping in. A very short one, if we could repeat the name of the documentary that is Coded Bias. It's also, I think, the Q&A box visible for everyone. And there's also a next question waiting, but we will keep that until our panel discussion. So please, now I would like to give the floor to Stefania.
Hello, everyone. And can you see and hear me? I suppose posts. So you can also see that, I mean, I'm a very privileged person, but because I happen to have curly hair, I cannot really blur my background without looking like someone was being cut it with scissors, which is not very, very elegant. So there's many very different ways of discriminating through algorithms, although this is a very, very innocent form of discrimination. Meaning, if you're not standard, right, as in skin color, like in the case that we saw in the documentary, or in a variety of other manners, then you might not be recognized by the system, or the system itself might try to, for example, give me straight hair, which I ultimately, in fact, I would actually really like. But yeah, whatever. So I would like to start by thanking the organizers of this session and the organizers of the festival altogether for bringing this documentary to this nice crowd of people. I mean, as we know, it's now on Netflix. Marlene already mentioned it, and that's great news because we need these stories to go viral. We need these stories to reach as many people as possible and reach those that are not yet converted. But I suppose that when you guys brought it over to us, it was actually not yet on Netflix. So kudos for singling it out and bringing this discussion to the table. Now, Marlene has already said a lot of things, and there are big shoes to fill, speaking after her with her experience and insights also in a lot of, not just the thinking, but also the doing of creating alternatives and fairer alternatives. So I'll try to, echo some of her points, adding something maybe, hopefully, and then, adding some reflections of hope resonate with some of you at least. Now, I was asked to, for example, comment amongst the prompts that I received for this session on what did I like and what I didn't like. And like Marlene, I really appreciated that, and that's very strange. There's so many women, and in fact, mostly women talking about AI. Now, as it happens, in fact, this is a very welcome change, not only because even if you look at the average Dutch news or any broadcast on television, we mostly have men talking, the expert, think also about COVID expertise, which is, a wide range of expertise. The experts are often men, or those that are asked to speak are often men. So I like that here, actually the voices are different. But I have to say that, I want to point to the fact that women have been historically silenced in the brief history of computing. And, I have, now that I sort of relocated my office to home, I'm surrounded by my, the books that are really cheer and that are really informing my thoughts. And amongst those, there's this, I don't know whether you can actually see it, maybe, yeah, the algorithm discriminates against the book as well. But you can probably see it now. It's called Program Inequality. And the subtitle is, and I read it for you, How Britain Discarded Women Technologists and Lost Its Edge on Computing. So this is a very nice book written by Mar Hicks from the United States, where she writes about the UK, who actually not only gives voice to women and shows how, unfortunately, they have been silent throughout the history of computing, but also she links the fact that women have been silenced to, economic disadvantage, literally. Like she basically argues that if you silence women, you might actually lost big time. And in this case, the argument is the UK lost its edge on computing. And in fact, most of the technologies that we use today originate in the Silicon Valley. Now, of course, I'm not really doing justice to a very complex narrative of a book, but I invite you, if you're curious about that, to look at the role of women in computing, because for many women that are now talking in this beautiful documentary that we have seen, many other are hiding and have been hidden for ages. Just to give you a sense, there is a very nice tiny documentary, very independent, very low budget, that circulates online, which is called The Computers in the plural, because the very same noun, computer, so the term that we use to refer to the machine today, actually originally referred to the women Which women? The women, the low-skilled, the relatively low-skilled women in the grand scheme of things that were inputting data into the computer, so allowing machines to learn, because computers and artificial intelligence in particular learn from data that is into them. So back then it was not a case of machine learning, but it was about data input. And they were women. So the very same noun that we use today to refer to machines was actually used to refer to social category of people. But besides that, the other thing that I really like in the documentary is the empowering narrative alongside the creepy story. Now, as someone who has been looking at the ethics of technology and at surveillance over the years, of course, I spend a lot of time indulging in the creepy side of the story. So thinking about how the world is basically going to ruin because we are all increasingly surveilled and we cannot even hide anymore. And our face is now becoming, as we've heard also in the documentary, with facial recognition technology, a stand-in for our identity, or as we have heard in China, for our credit history, or for many other elements that have little to do, in fact, with facial expression. So, I spend a lot of time doing that. And sometimes I forget that there is actually a good, they call it movement, but certainly maybe it's not yet a big movement, but it's definitely a mobilization of people that are raising critical questions. And this is fantastic. And there's also, one of my favorite moments of the entire documentary might not be, at the highest point in terms of critical thinking, but it's definitely the highest point in terms of the community, showing the community around that. And it is when 4 of the women that you have seen speaking in the various moments of the documentary toast to the change they're going to make in the next year, forcing Congress to, for example, deal with facial recognition. So it's wonderful that, and we have to remember that if we create a group, if we create a collective of people that think critically about something, things can be changed. The enemy is big, right? Let's face it, and Marlene mentioned it, it's difficult to create alternatives, right? It's difficult to imagine that we are the little David, against the gigantic Goliath of tech companies. But nonetheless, we should remember that, like it happens with many other social movements, there's still hope and there's still a possibility of exerting change. Now, what I did not like of the documentary and in general of everything that relates to AI is the fact that this remains very, very Western. So the documentary in particular is very US centric. It originates in the US, and a lot of the examples, there's also some excursions in different parts of the world, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, but it embodies a very, very Western perspective, a very US centric perspective. But you might remember that at the beginning of the documentary, Virginia Eubanks, whose book actually sits also here next to me. Oh, again, discrimination against the book, but you know what it is? Automating Inequality is a great book, and it looks at how digital tools are used to discriminate against the poor. And she has a very, very interesting insight, which probably is the highest thinking point in the documentary, but not very new if you have read the book. She basically says that if we want to understand the future of technology, we have to look at poor communities in poor areas. So it's not that you look, at the best technology that reaches the rich, but look at the creepy stuff that happens amongst the poor, because that's where there's less expectation that rights, like privacy rights, are upheld, and therefore companies can experiment. Frankly, if you really want to know, we don't even have to go that far to the US, or the poor communities, or the racialized communities that are portrayed in documentary. If you go a bit south of Amsterdam, if you go to Eindhoven, then you can find a very creepy Big Brother type of project where a city, well, a couple of quarters of a city, like an area, city area, is being built where people can live rent-free, so they don't have to pay a rent, but they have to give up their data. Now, this worries me, even if I don't live in Eindhoven, even if I have enough money to afford to pay rent, which is not trivial these days. As I said, I'm very privileged. But it worries me because whatever gets piloted there might eventually also reach us, for example, in Amsterdam or pretty much anywhere else. So we don't have to look very, very far, for example, to China to see that things actually look very gloomy. But so while there's plenty of poverty, pockets of poverty in the United States, the real playground of tech companies are ultimately countries and areas where there is no, for example, general data protection regulation, which is the piece of legislation that protects us all as European citizens, or even if you're not a European citizen, that protects you if you are at the moment on Dutch soil. But the problem that I have with the documentary, in that it is so very Western, is that the documentary in a way universalizes an interpretation, an approach that is very Western and very privileged in nature. I give you an example. Sometimes privacy is less important than putting food on the table. For example, poor families in India prefer to give away their fingerprint in exchange for food rations, so food support to feed their children. And privacy becomes literally a luxury that they cannot afford. Sometimes people want to be visible to the state. It is the case of COVID. During the COVID times, not only in the Netherlands, but in many, many other countries, people wanted to get wherever it was available, some allowance or some subsidy if they were out of work. And there you see how immediately you prefer to be recognized, you prefer to be identified, you prefer to be surveilled by the state, no matter how invasive the technology is. So there's another two aspects that I find, one is connected to this, that are not discussed in the documentary. And one of them relates to the risk of being too Western in our interpretation. And the second is more a devil's advocate point, but I'll leave it for later. So first point. Now, when we wear our glasses, our lenses that are very, very Western, if not US-centric, we forget that the social, cultural, historical context in which technologies originate and are used is actually very important. Now, we saw the case in the documentary of the social credit score in China. We also know that China is an authoritarian country where people are used to certain, let's say, type of invasive behavior by the state. But Katie O'Neill's discussing it says that it is very, very bad, right? And it is bad if we see it from the European perspective on privacy as well. Now, I have the girl, I forgot her name now, that talks about how the credit score impacts her life. She at some point says, actually, I like the credit score because it gives me the chance, to understand whether I can trust or not a person, instead of getting to know that person. Now, in a country like China, where there's no such a thing as privacy, oversimplifying, but you know what I mean, and where trust is held in high accounts, because it is an informal economy. For ages, it was an informal economy where contract was handshakes. You understand immediately where the social credit score system comes from and why the large majority of Chinese people are actually very fond of it. And this is, one good example, but not the only one, of how sometimes wearing our very Western glasses makes us miss part of the picture. This is not to defend intrusive state behavior, but it's just to say we should probably contextualize it a bit broader. Now, the second point I would like to say that was not discussed in the documentary is more like an observation that a devil's advocate would do. So we have heard that algorithms are biased. True. We also heard that algorithms are biased because the men who designed them are biased. So we translate with wiring in the technology our own bias. But what the documentary doesn't tell us is that algorithms are still less biased than people. So there is a professor at Harvard, an economist, who actually look at the difference in bias and biased decisions of humans versus algorithms. Yes, the algorithm doesn't perform very well, but the human performs even worse. That's to say, I mean, we still need better algorithms, right? But again, we should probably broaden the scope of the question that we ask about this phenomenon. They are technological, but also more than that. Now, looking forward, and I come quickly to a conclusion. We heard from the documentary that we need regulation and we need safeguards. True, very, very true. Now, I have good news for you, because in the European Union, there are currently 2 campaigns, and probably there are others that I do not know, that are trying to lobby the European Union, which is the one, we should remember it, that created the General Data Protection Regulation, that might not be perfect, but is the gold standard of data protection as we have it today. Can be made better, but it is still quite good and quite looking forward and protective of people's rights. It is asking, so these campaigns want to ask the European Union to legislate, to intervene in the creation of these safeguards. One is the Reclaim Your Face campaign. Google it and sign the petition, and I tell you why. Reclaim Your Face, the Reclaim Your Face campaign, it's a coalition of a lot of organizations. If I remember correctly, there's also the Dutch Bits of Freedom part of it. And what they're trying to do is to ban facial recognition technology in public space within the European Union. So it's a broad scope. It's a very beautiful thing. Think, by the way, that we have facial recognition cameras in Schiphol, that we have them in several cities in the urban landscape in the Netherlands. So they're already there, right? Now, the Reclaim Your Face campaign is trying to lobby for this, and also launched European Citizen Initiative, which is the petition tool of the European Union, whereby if 1 million European citizens sign the petition, the European Union, Brussels people have to take action, and they have to start a legislation process. So please sign, because there's time until mid-February 2022 to reach the 1 million very ambitious result. By the way, there have to be 1 million in at least 7 different countries. So a total of 1 million, but people coming from at least 7 different European countries. I believe the current count is a bit low. It's like 45,000 people only, but that's why we need many, many more. So go to reclaimyourface.eu, I believe. There's another campaign, by the way, organized by Access Now, a digital rights organization, that is trying to ask the European Union to intervene in regulating or preventing, let's say, travel checks, travel software that basically discriminate or that assigns each of us will go, for example, through airport security to a gender. So it can be male or female. It's automatically done. But as you can imagine, if you adopt this binary scheme, you're always going to miss out and discriminate against non-gender conforming individuals. So action is being taken right now as we speak. So please go do it. And I have some extra points, but I leave them for the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefania. Well, the thing you started with about the curly hair, I really recognized. So that's why I mostly have my hair like this during the video calls. Also, what you mentioned about that people living in poorer areas are kind of used maybe by experimenting with AI. It's also an interesting part in the documentary where women living in a not so rich part of New York try to protest against the face recognition in the building where they live. But I didn't know that it was also the case in Eindhoven. And I will look up the Reclaim Your Face campaign later on. For now, we already have some interesting questions, and I think it's good if we answer them. A short one that's about, could you provide us with a list of recent relevant books on the subject? And Marlene has already posted a link to the website of Coded Bias, www.codedbias.com/cast. and that highlights the speakers of the documentary and the books that they wrote. So that might be an interesting starting point. Then another question, wait, there's so many of them already. Yeah, there was also something that I found interesting, and it's a bit touched upon in the documentary as well. This is the question: could ethical awareness be seen as an element of the definition of intelligence? If so, how to incorporate ethics into the design of AI algorithms? I think actually the documentary concludes with the statement that intelligence without ethics is not intelligence at all. But maybe Marleen and Stefania have to, they can add something on this. Does any of you both want to elaborate a bit on this? Marleen, I think you already wrote a bit about this topic. Oh, you're still on mute. Yeah.
Well, I think I put an answer in a part of the question, an earlier question. Beware of ethics washing. It's a definition by Thomas Metzinger, who says that we can organize and cultivate ethical debates. As I said, on the side, if you do some ethical debates on the side, but mostly that's being done in order to delay, postpone, avoid, deter from, or substitute for policy making and regulation. So I think I agree with Stefania that we need legislation here. A certain use of AI should not be legal, and so we can have a lot of ethical debates. But I mean, the problem is Trump also has an ethics. You know, Mark Zuckerberg has also his own ethics. So we can start to say, well, is Zuckerberg right or is Trump right? But we also have a legal structure. And I think first we have to imply to bring back the legal we first have to bring back this rule of law in the digital before we're going to start all kind of sort of like other debates. So, because one of the other questions is, well, if people want to share their data in order to get something else, or because to get food stamps, for example, this should not be something in the first place, because we need to have the integrity of the person, the personhood. As we have integrity of our body, so we are legally not allowed to sell our kidneys. So why put people in a position, especially when they have not a lot of money themselves, that so people that don't have money, well, they will have to give up their personhood and give it to the digital programs and the big brothers and the big tech and the big also the governments. But then the persons that can pay for their sovereignty, well, they are sovereign. So I think we also have to rethink the whole discussion. It's not about privacy, it's about sovereignty. And it's about the integrity of the personhood, which I think is a totally new, I hope that opens up the debate in the sense that it's not just privacy discussion that we're having. It's a much broader discussion. And then if we don't do this, if we don't keep the idea of the person who is sovereign, then we lose our whole conception of democracy.
Yeah.
So it's much deeper than only privacy.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that what you say about sovereignty. It maybe it's already part of an answer to another question, namely, what is the amount of individual decision making that a person can make on this? If a person wants to sell their data, should we stop them or allow it as a personal choice? I think you can also say that this is a question about, well, at least have the autonomy, right, to make your own decisions. It's talking about face recognition. My face is a bit in the sun, so I will just stand like this. What do you think about this, Stefania? Do you agree with Marleen, or?
Sorry, there was can you just repeat the last sentence, because there was a glitch in the connection.
Well, the last question, and it is a bit, I think, relating to what Marleen said about, if a person wants to sell their data, should we stop them or allow it as a personal choice? And Yeah, so then it's more of a matter of being autonomous and sovereign instead of instead of just instead of not having a choice at all.
Yeah, well, I guess this reminds me a little bit of the observations I've heard so many times from a lot of people that, hey, I have nothing to hide. So I'm okay with intrusive surveillance because I'm not going to be jailed, right? I'm not doing anything wrong that would single me out. Now, the question is whether we want to be targeted with, for example, advertising, which we might still like because it's quite comfy to be given, advertising that we prefer, that resonates with us as opposed to just random content, right? The untargeted version of it. But to get more on the point of what if it is my personal choice, I do it? Well, what I think is to be kept into account is that there might be some exceptionally prepared people. And by prepared, I mean people who have, luckily enough, the ability to understand algorithms or to appreciate the various nuances and tensions and dynamics that this type of data, together with the technology, tells about ourselves. But how many of these people actually exist? How many are able to make informed choices? And, I actually do not feel empowered to make a fully informed choice. And I spent my life thinking about technology, right? So, and I'm definitely not, the most up to date or at the forefront or anything, but certainly I have at least, the time that other people might not have and the resources to do so. And the reason is that not only a matter of knowledge or expertise, but also a matter of we really do not know what this data one day will be used for. Do you know, for example, that our police officer authorities, the security agencies, store an enormous amount of encrypted data, which is literally data that they cannot read, right? But why do they store it? They store it in the hope that computing is going to be so powerful that one day they're going to be able to break even the most, tight encryption. And this day, for a lot of the encryption, has already come. So you never know exactly what are the ramifications of any decision that you might do, however informed it might look right now. Plus, again, this ties up to the issue of privilege and the issue of expertise. Not everyone is in the position of doing an informed choice because we simply don't have the element, we simply don't have the story. So it's like, if I want to sell my kidney because I don't have food on the table for my children, where, the state should really have rules on that, and it does, right? And instead, the state should actually think about how to support me so that I can feed my children. So the question is, I think, it has a lot of different sides, and pretty much all of them something that, they have something that make us worry.
Yeah. And you also mentioned that privacy is not an absolute value, but how could you handle then this fluid concept of privacy in our electronically world?
Well, I hope Marlene here comes to rescue. I can try with an answer, but definitely this is, the $1 million question. It is also one that I think has a very personalized answer to each and every of us, but also a very contingent answer. So, I might be against facial recognition technology in the public square because I'm also a protester, and as a troublemaker, sometimes I want to go to the squares with, the idea that I might not be just singled out like that and taken to jail. Sort of science fiction mode, but as we saw in the documentary, actually does happen on a fairly regular basis. But I might, for example, would like to have facial recognition technology. I'm just providing a bit of a random example, but for other purposes or reasons that I might find more viable or more interesting or simply more practical, like facial recognition technology on my phone, so that I don't have to always input my PIN number, my PIN code. So I guess it's a continuous it's kind of a slippery slope, and it's a fine line that we have to negotiate with care for ourselves.
Yeah,
This allows me.
Yeah, you say so. It's a very, very thin line, and we have to be careful that we don't fall off or don't.
Totally, but also we have to be we have to be good citizens of the digital. So we have to be literate, like in the same way in which children in the Netherlands learn to swim, at least the basics, right? So that if they fall into a canal, they don't die, they don't drown immediately. In the same way, we should really teach our children, but also teach ourselves as bigger people that that receive the technology at a relatively late stage in life, and we continue receiving new technology all the time as technological innovation progresses. We have to commit to literacy. It's something very important.
Marleen, you were an early adopter, so when it comes about having experience with the internet and with technology, I think you are fairly ahead, maybe. What do you think about what Stefania is saying?
Well, I think why I started with that we have to be critical towards all discussions about technology is that it's not that you have to be against technology or you're pro or contra technology. Critical means that you have ability, and I think this is what Stefania means also with literacy, is that you understand what the impact is, what is behind the scene, what technology actually is, and not just as a consumer that you are able to use it, but also understand what's inside of the black box and how technology is part of, as I said, power infrastructure. But also that we understand that the mystification. I think the general public, not all, if we use food, we go to a store, and we in a supermarket, and we buy chicken, we are pretty sure that the chicken has been checked several times, that there is nothing wrong with the chicken. If something is wrong, then there's a whole lot of organizations and authorities that will ask them to get back all the food, all the problematic products that were in the store. We don't have this with the digital. When you now use the app stores from Apple and Android stores, you're pretty sure that these applications that you use are breaching all kind of laws. You're almost for certain that it's happening, which is really crazy. I mean, this should not be there. That we have laws in place. We have not just the GDPR, we have a lot of others. So, and of course we will need even more laws, and they will come up. So we need, this is 30 years of leaving the market, organizing our digital space. It's this neoliberal idea that the market will do nice stuff for us, and that we, as a Homo economicus, will get everything for free, and that we will bargain. We will we will be able to say, well, when it's free, then you can have my data, which is really, this is not a market. So the idea that the digital technology should not be seen as just a market is something that is part of the whole critical debate about neoliberalism. So we have to rethink what the public values of the digital are, and this means also that we need other people on the table, and we need other output indicators when people are engaged with developing or thinking or designing technology. It means it's not just something, it's not informatics or it's not economics. It is actually what we're building are human artifacts. Technology are artifacts. So we have to so it's culture, it's politics, it's law, so we have to reframe the whole debate about technology. And I think it's happening. It is on its way. So to me, I think humanities studies and social studies would say we are about AI, not the beta guys or the women, but because it's about shaping society. So I think, and so I feel that this very strange that the humanities and social sciences are so far from the core of the discussion, data is not neutral. Data is not every data, the data that we make are deliberate choices because we
Yeah.
measure them
So, so
and
when
then we
you
categorize them. So all these kind of things are actually should be part of the humanities studies.
and when you say we need other people on the table, so that also means like men and women, but also like you say, invite the humanities more to this discussion. So,
But also, yeah, but if you think about, I had this meeting with some taxi drivers that are totally fed up with Uber, totally, because their reputation is in their hands. They don't have a real connection with the people that they drive for, because all the knowledge about the people that they work, that it's all in the applications, in the databases of Uber. So they want to start a taxi corporation, and we're going to help them with it. This is, so I would love to have them the AI, give the taxi drivers their AI, and of course also secure personal data in the data commons. These are notions. So there is a way to have architecture to respect the digital identity by attribute-based identity. We can respect the personhood because we can imply that things are data commons. So you're not allowed to use certain data for market activity. We can define also new ways of governance for this. But then we have to have this kind of, then we have to see this technology as power, as a way also to empower people and to organize themselves instead of being organized. And this is the shift that we have to make.
a question I have for both of you is also like, I like the idea, like invite everyone and make it inclusive. But this morning I was reading in the newspaper about Wikigap. I don't know if you have read it. Like it's an initiative to invite more women to make Wikipedia lemmas, because it's also kind of male dominated. And the question from the audience is, how do I get my 16-year-old mixed race daughter enthusiastic about breaking the male hold on designing algorithms by joining that field in university? Well, but in a broader sense, like how we can all say like, okay, it shouldn't only be the white man making everything and making all the decisions, but how could you maybe inspire people to join this discussion? Do you have any ideas on that?
First of all, I really believe there are many also white men that are very critical about AI. So I wouldn't make it like, oh, let's have the women, let's solve the problem. It's always strange when something goes really, really wrong. They turn to artists and women to solve it. So I think I think that there's, of course, it's also, as Stefania also said, it's also West versus South. It's also about Western or Silicon Valley, China versus Europe. So there's the shift in power that is part of this whole. It's not just a man, women, or a little. I mean, this is huge. This is really macro politics as well. That's why this kind of Saudi Arabian money, oil money, billions of it, are being invested in these data platforms. This is a new power infrastructure. So let's have men there as well, and not only the women to solve this problem.
Yeah, so
But I think women, of course, and people with
that.
marginalized groups are definitely the ones that are pointing to have the right questions and pointing out. And I think there's I would say if let this 16-year-old, was she let her look at this coded bias, because the women in this documentary are really great women, and they're smart and it's fun, and I think there's a whole world to gain. It's definitely something that you can step in and play a role. It's not done yet.
Do you agree, Stefania?
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of work to do. So there's place for pretty much everyone. Plus, it's not that anyone has the magic wand. So we do need a lot of different people at the table. And we should also not forget what they were, the people that were at some point called the next billion users. So the large majority of the internet users that are actually not internet users yet. So citizens, essentially people who are not yet connected. So technically they're not internet users. But what are their preferences? What do they want the internet or AI for? And how can we also help them, for example, out of their likely to be position of poverty? But how do we actually do it in practice? It's a big challenge because for most part, these are relatively tedious, definitely very gloomy topics that not everyone gets very passionate about. But I can tell you that, for example, with research projects called InSight, funded by the Dutch Scientific Council. So there's a number of people that are working on this. So it's people from the humanities at the University of Amsterdam, from media studies, people from informatics, also at the University of Amsterdam, and a lawyer from Groningen. What we want to do is not only think about values and technologies, but organize workshops with Dutch citizens to see how together we can design technology standards. So something very deep into the stack of the infrastructure, but something that determines the rules of engagement, literally, of a lot of the stuff that we do. For example, DigiID is a standard for digital identity, right? How do we get these things right? How do we make them better? I think also people who don't have necessarily, not the women that spoke in the documentary, but those who have a sense of what they might like, but they don't feel empowered enough to talk, or they simply never really thought much about it, but they have something to contribute. They should also be at the table. So we are engaging in what we call co-design, which is not something we invented ourselves. A lot of people do it. Also the Waag does it. But in the attempt to not only get technology better, but also, it's as a sort of stepping stone towards literacy, towards, encouraging people to ask themselves questions. Documentary on Netflix is a great start, but it cannot stop there. Yeah. So that's one way to. At the same time, I wanted to just touch upon the question by Robin on how to convince her daughter to do it. Sometimes as a social science / humanities scholar, I find I'm a bit annoyed that now there is a lot of emphasis in getting female scholars or students into STEM. That's great. We need more of those, right? We need role models, and there are role models. Maybe the Barbie scientist is not my favorite way to go, but that's maybe also a way to do it. But let's not forget that, as Marlies said, humanities are also doing AI, and the revolutions are actually done with ideas, not with technology alone. So the idea matters probably more than implementing them in technologies. So it starts always with an idea, and then it gets into a product. So, we need both sides.
Well, and just coming back to what you said about taking care of our own literacy, I think it's interesting what you said earlier on about that algorithms are less biased than people. So maybe that's just a first step for anyone to be aware of our own bias that is always present.
Yeah, that was really a comment on devil's advocate comment. I understand why in a documentary like that, which is on bias in AI, you don't reflect on that. But yes, definitely the problem that we're talking about, and I think the documentary actually makes it very, very beautifully clear, although it's a very sad message. This is our society. Now it gets reflected in technology, and technology augments it. Amplifies it, wires it into a lot of aspects of social life. But, inequality as existed before technology, and technologies will not eradicate it, racism as well. So there's a lot of work to do at various different levels of our society.
We're nearing the end of our program. I see it's already 6 o'clock. I think we have still 2 questions that we can touch upon, but if anyone has a final question they want to ask, please feel free to write it down in the Q&A box. The first one is, can you name examples of legislation you would suggest on AI and automated decision making? And I can see that Marleen is already busy with typing an answer, but maybe you can also share it with us live in the audience.
Well, I think I think at the moment the European Commission is working on several legislations. One of them is the Digital Service Act and the Digital Market Act, DSA and DMA. The GDPR still also has a lot, which will also has also effects on algorithms. So it's not just data or privacy issues that's being in place there. So I think a lot of those legislation still is almost in place. I think in certain parts of the world, facial recognition is on hold, not totally forbidden yet legally, but I think this is definitely one of the things that should happen, as also on killer robots and so on. So there's a lot of that needed. We don't only need laws, we also need to implement them, to have enough authorities to work on them, because that I think is a moment a problem that we have. There's a lot of complaints, but we don't really enforce them. So yeah, so enforce the law. So this is one of the bigger problems. But I think at a whole, I think we are just at the beginning of another debate and another awareness of technology. We have been so long in the dark and being the whole public notion of technology has been pushed away. I think we are just in the moment, and this kind of documentaries really help to engage a larger public with it, to go beyond like the people that were there all the time. I mean, the last 30 years, these problems have been foreseen. This is not just new. This has been the debate, the underlying debate of the last 30 years. Only now people start to see the effects of it and start to become more aware of it. So yeah, so I think I make this so we can fix it. To me, means that you have to act on a lot of different levels in legislation, in opposing to this mystification of technology, in awareness and also empowerment of people and literacy, but also in starting to create the alternatives. And there is a lot of room for alternatives, and people now move to Signal instead of WhatsApp. There's a whole new area for social media, new space. There's ProtonMail, there's Brave. So there are more and more alternatives that are based on public values and are not infringing on our privacy or building on bias algorithms. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. I think another 5 to 10 years before we can see a little bit light in the tunnel.
Stefania. Oh, can you switch on the mic? Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I was typing my answer to Robin.
We're so multimedial. I'm also a bit confused. I can see you're both busy typing answers and asking them aloud live. Yeah. So I saw that you were also adding on this question. Can you share your answer with the public?
Sorry, no, it was just about, it was a question about how to encourage younger people to study, for example, data science, to engage with, the hardcore of what you have heard in the documentary. But what if they're maybe not particularly inclined towards, for example, some hard science? Now, the good news is that the future is interdisciplinary, so there's a lot of room for pretty much anyone. So there I suggested a little, I a little plug for a new program that we have at the University of Amsterdam. That's exactly that will be launched in September, I believe. But there's much more, of course, available. But essentially, what we need is people that ask critical questions, whatever their background, their realm of interaction is. I mean, even if they work in a supermarket, they still might want to ask critical questions, citizens, and that's what I think we should take away from a documentary like Coded Bias. We should really try not to be daunted too much by the fact that we are indeed facing a big enemy, if you want, or a big battle. One that, as Marlene mentioned, is has a certain time frame, has long roots, but as also a certain trajectory looking forward. But there's a place in this battle for pretty much anyone.
It's, well, the future is interdisciplinary. I like that statement. So there's a lot to look forward to. And right now, I think for anyone who didn't watch the documentary yet, they are all looking forward to really watch it because they hopefully got very inspired by your interesting talks. Oh, now the sun is shining. Okay, I go like this again. I am really also looking forward to watching the documentary again after hearing you talk. And maybe I will also reread the book 1984 by George Orwell, just to have a bit of nostalgia. I think we have about covered everything. Just checking last time. Oh yeah, well, there's still questions popping in, so maybe one last before we say goodbye to everyone. Oh, it disappeared again. You're too quick by answering them by typing, so I cannot see where did it go?
We need both. So we need both the empowerment of people and having them technology savvy enough and literate enough to get it in their own hands, as that we need legislation and we have to break up big tech really, really fast. So there's not one silver bullet here.
Yes.
We need a lot of different actions at the same time.
A lot of different actions at the same time. Well, that is where the interdisciplinary part comes in again. For now, I would like to thank you both for your interesting contributions to this topic, and also everyone who was watching via YouTube or our Zoom webinar. And please check all the websites to be updated about the Imagine Film Festival and also about the SPUI 25 program, and of course the Coded Bias website, codedbias.com. And what was it again, Stefania? Reclaimyourface.com?
It's reclaim your face, one word, .eu. Sign, please.
.eu.
Convince everyone to sign, because we need to reach 1 million, but the clock is ticking.
The clock is ticking. Well, that is, how do you say? It's sounding a bit suspicious. Let's hope we will reach the deadline in time. Thank you all. Have a nice evening, and I hope to see you again at the next lecture. Goodbye.